sounds cliche, but start to do it for the wrong reasons, and I did a post the other day about the real key, I think, to longevity in the gym is for it to not be your sole identity. And so often people just, when their entire self-esteem is attached to their physique, when it doesn't go well, that's also a recipe for disaster and makes them then hate the gym. And if you have goals in the gym, but it's not life or death, I think that's also what makes the process more enjoyable, when it's not going perfect and you have things outside the gym and hobbies and all that stuff.
I think there's two things you touched on there, which is interesting, about people almost not being happy when they get to the end goal. Because also what most people don't realize is most of the time they get to the end of their first diet and they're going to be short of where the end goal they have in their head is. Like the first diet almost is like cleaning the palate. It's like we spoke about at the start of this episode or before we went on, I think it was before we went on air, about tidying the house and having cleaners and the environment. I think the first diet is like cleaning the house. It's just showing you what you have to work with. So Mark, it's an absolute pleasure to get you on the show. My first question has changed based on that incredible picture you have behind you of the Joker. And if you're good at something, never do it for free. Now, I get the impression that's not just a favorite movie quote. There is some substance behind why you put that behind yourself in your backdrop. So tell us a little bit about why you've got that photo behind you.
Well, multiple reasons. Number one, obviously, I'm a huge Batman fan, and The Dark Knight was the greatest movie in the history of movies, in my personal opinion, which is probably not correct, but I love it. I've probably watched it 100 times. Now, you know what? Like that quote, when I was young, I think a lot of people in business or whatever, you're kind of learning a lot of your skills as a PT, and you're trying to help people and stuff like that. And I wasn't very good at kind of selling myself and having the ability to, actually realize that I'm offering a service and helping people. So therefore it's a transaction, and you kind of get in the, I don't know, for me, I've always kind of been try to be the nice guy. And a lot of times that gets taken advantage of very much in life. And, luckily these days with my products, I sell online, so you don't have to have that sales conversation. But, any young PT, it's when you're always trying to be the nice guy and then you get the hey, now I actually have to ask for money from that conversation. Or, hey, what's your rate? And the sale process, there was always that, oh man, and you felt like a terrible person for, asking for it. So it's just a reminder that if you're, good at something, that's fine. And, you take the time to learn and bring value, then it's more than okay to actually expect, something in return for that transaction.
I think it's something that so many coaches deal with as well, because most coaches, people are money driven. They become money. Most people, maybe not now in the online fitness world where working from this imaginary Wi-Fi connection on the beach becomes sexy. But so many coaches don't come into this with their money driven. They'd be lawyers or investment bankers if they were money driven. They do it because they want to help people. And because of that, they don't really want to have those conversations asking for money. But I remember Jordan Shallow said something to me once on a call that really stuck with me. It's like, if I price my services low, that means I'm going to be overstretched and can't help that person who still can't afford my process. The people messaging me who can't afford me still can't afford me if I was half the price. So if I price myself what I'm worth, I get the really committed people that can afford me. That alleviates more of my time to help people for free. Have you found that, like, now you're in a position where you're maybe a bit more financially comfortable, your online coaching is maybe a little bit more expensive outside of your books, now you've got more time to devote to content, podcasts, helping people in the DMs. You mentioned to me the other day that you get a lot of people asking you questions. Like, are you allowed to help? Do you think you can help more people now because you're in a better financial position with your business than you were when you were being the nice guy?
I actually just read a book on I forget what it was. It's on around like time management by a guy called Dan Kennedy. And it's kind of like knowing kind of what your value is for your time. And so, for example, if you're, I've got an online business and, it's selling en masse and you're making good money for that, and then you go, hey, I'll take online clients. If you're taking an online client and it takes you, say, an hour worth of time a week, is that client transaction on the same level as what you're getting elsewhere? And that's one of the things you need to look at. So if you're making $300, say, for example, from your normal business, but then you have time to grow that and build that, but then you want to take on online clients and you're getting $50 an hour, then obviously you're kind of doing a disservice to yourself and your main thing. you're then probably going to kind of not resent the client, but resent the situation that you're not getting kind of paid for your time, what you're worth and stuff like that. So I think it's really important to kind of know your worth. And exactly as you said, I I have about, I think, 13 clients at the moment, so I used to have 30, 40, 50 or so at my peak online. And at the moment, I can pick and choose. I get a lot of requests. I've trained a lot of people and at a good level. So I get lots of interest and stuff like that. But the number one thing that holds people back from signing up is always going to be the number. I tell them the price. And one of those hard things is that it's like, you don't want to be rude, but you also want to kind of say your price. It's like, hey, what's your price? I'm like, ugh, like this is the price. It's even for me still an uncomfortable feeling. Like, even though you know what you're worth, and for me, I've trained a lot of people, and off the back end of paying me, they've made hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars from working with me and affiliation and winning comps and winning world titles. So their ROI on that investment of working with me is 100 to 1, and I've seen it over and over. But obviously then you get a general population mom and stuff like that. They're not trying to do that. So it's a kind of a different ROI for them. And so it's really something I found is it's really choosing the right client, because then you also, the more you charge, I've had some bad experience online with people where they expect you to be a doctor, a psychiatrist, solve their problems, solve their marriage problems. And I think the price point, because it's higher, they expect so much more. And in the end, like when I'm working online with someone, I'm not selling really so much time for money. I'm selling you a result. I'm selling you an education. So sometimes check-ins will be short. Sometimes check-ins will be really long. I do long consults, but it all kind of depends. And so I'm sure you've probably seen, and a lot of coaches out there, is a lot of the times you've had problems with online clients, they're the ones you do the longest email replies to. And the ones who get the worst results are the ones you're just so stressed and you go above and beyond for. You're messaging multiple times in the week and you're doing all this stuff. And then the ones who just absolutely love you and adore you and get the best results, who say the best things about you, they're sending you one sentence check-ins and all right, cool. And it's so chilled. So it's just funny, man. So it's one of the things. That's why now that I only work with a few people, and most of my clients have actually had for about 3 to 5 years now, which is pretty crazy. One of the things is that it's really finding people who I try to find people as well who can comfortably afford it, because I don't want people to feel like it's a big stretch, because then they feel pressured, and then they feel pressured to get, really rush the result, So I really like working with people long term, but in order to do that, they obviously have to comfortably fit into their budget. So if they're expecting, they come to you and they've been eating really low calories and they're, being in a shit place and they're expecting an epic 12-week transformation because they're paying you a lot of money, it's not always the best relationship or the partnership. So it's really kind of choosing, as hard as it is, people who can fit in your budget. And it's just like, it doesn't mean you're money hungry, even though, every personal trainer should, it's their job. But it's just like, it's kind of learning not to feel bad, just like, would all like a Lamborghini or something, but it doesn't mean we can afford it. Doesn't mean the Lamborghini is a bad car for charging that amount of money. So it's just one of those things of trying to know what you're trying to do. When I actually really started, I was always so cheap. I used to charge $40 an hour. I used to be the lowest price. That was Australian dollars, so like 20 pounds or something.
Yeah.
It was only 7-8 years ago as well. I used to charge super, super low in person. And the reason was I just wanted to be the busiest trainer in the gym so I could get as much experience as possible. So I was doing all these courses and I just wanted to learn. And most importantly, I wanted to apply. So back then, 8-9 years ago, I didn't care about money, or it was, as you don't get into PT to make a lot of money initially, that's for sure. But the way I looked at it was, if I could be really affordable or the cheapest, I could work with heaps of people. But by actually doing that, it then allowed you to get better. And then as a byproduct, which wasn't actually the plan, it allowed you to drive up your rate more and more and more. The more people you can help, more results, more experience. So that's one of the things obviously I know you do more stuff with business than myself, but I'm sure you see like so many, I think, trainers want to start out charging all this high rates and having this massive income and all that stuff. And they kind of, I forget the saying, pull the cart before the horse, or the horse before the cart, or one of those things. They kind of get in the wrong order. So everything, the ability to charge a high rate is really, it's, well, why can someone charge a high rate? Because it's value. That's what money is. It's just a transactional for value. And if you truly can bring value for that price point, then you should charge what you want to charge. And it's not, you're not forcing someone into it either.
We are in a world now where people are wanting the quick fix. I see more and more people coming, and there's nothing wrong with coming in and going straight onto the online game. I generally think there are complementary skills. Like, looking at your content, it's very clear that your experience as a one-to-one coach has helped you in the online world. But I do think the one-to-one coaching is almost like the micro. It's like, how do I make this split squat perfect? Whereas online is a bit more the macro, where you're going to be in 6 months, 9 months, 2 years. And yes, you do both with both, but the focus is one. But I find that a lot of coaches want to skip that step, and they're looking at trending audio and lead gen magnets and business mentorships, and they've not actually learned how fat loss occurs or how to get a result. And I think a lot of people could probably take that step back and, like you, gain that experience. But let's say someone has done that, gone about it the right way. You mentioned, like, taking on more people. Eventually, they might resent what they're doing if they're stretching their time too thin. And someone who's maybe starting online whilst doing a full book of one-to-one, and you've transitioned from one-to-one over to online, and you spoke about dream clients and how to find that kind of person. But early on, you take everyone. You don't know who your dream client is unless you work with everyone and find out who you like. How do you start to transition from that point of, I'm overbooked and over capacity, when it's scary to get rid of some income, to that point where you can maybe move to an online business or work with a specific type of person?
For myself, like, I've always in my career routinely kind of taken kind of really backwards financial steps to put myself in places to work with better people or be in better gym associations and stuff like that. So the first time I ever started making really good money for like myself, my PT, kind of, a couple $1,000s a week, which felt like me being a billionaire back then. I was doing that at a really small gym, and I was like, oh wow, this is really good money. And I was like, well, where do I go from here? Like, I was just training kind of every day, like people where you turn up, and I didn't know much then, so it was just kind of like the babysitting trainer where you make it up on the day and hang out and, all right, see you next week and stuff like that. And then, I learned about all these good gyms and all these kind of elite level personal training gyms. I was like, wow, I've got to be there. Like, I want to be a part of, I didn't want to be the best coach at a small nothing gym. I want to be the worst coach at a best gym so I could get better. And that's always kind of been my mentality throughout my career. So I went there and took, a 6-figure pay cut to go there and work twice as hard. But then the reason why I did that was then it was a place where the clients are actually signing up 2-3 times a week, 12-week blocks, and you could start learning program design and periodization and all that stuff. So it wasn't so much about necessarily finding like the dream client, so to speak. It was more about places where I could actually really upskill at a higher level, where I could actually strategize and put long-term plans together, where it wasn't a matter of, hey, will this trainer buy a 3-pack of sessions, but they were signing up, for 12-week blocks or 24-week blocks, so allow you to really plan out things. And, so back then, like, I'd be working with, moms, I'd be working with some physique competitors, I'd be working with rich business guys. And despite it being a really, I guess, varied client base, the one thing they had in common was you had a specific time frame, and they meant business. They want to get great results, and that's where for me was the bigger thing. It wasn't so much about, oh man, I want to do bodybuilding, I want to do women's gen pop fat loss. It was more, I just wanted to work with people who wanted to really do great things, whatever that was. And that's kind of what's always interested me. And so even recently I did a post in my Facebook group that I'd take on clients for the first time in 3 years. And, got all these, I think yesterday, and all these inquiries, but like, oh, what's the criteria? Like I said, there's no criteria. There's no specific client. I'm not looking for a specific client at the moment. It's just kind of the right fit. Like, does your goal interest me? So I think that I'm not sure if that's kind of answering your question, but I think it's more so about trying to, if you're a coach who wants to be someone who wants to get great results, and that great results can be so many different kind of ways to look at what is a great result, but for me, it's always about, can you find clients who want to listen to you and do everything that you want to do? Because that's where you're going to actually really allow yourself to learn. When you start to become less of a babysitter and hoping that they're just going to turn up, and you start to get clients who, whatever their goal is, even if it's, improve their health, or they have digestion issues or whatever, but having a client that wants to follow a plan and listen to you and actually practice it and stick at it is so important, because that's where you actually allow you to learn as a coach. And that's kind of what I've always kind of, associated with. And even with my programs these days, I have, train world bikini champions, I train pro bikini competitors and all that stuff. But I also love training general population. I am a pre and postnatal coach. I love men's physique. That was kind of what I built my name on, which people don't really realize these days. So I know it kind of sounds a bit all over the place, but for me, it's just, I have a passion for helping people achieve specific goals. I don't think of myself as a hypertrophy coach. I don't think of myself as a strength coach. And people are like, oh, I'm a glute coach. I'm not any of those things. I just like to say I'm a coach, and I just want to help people. I'm not a rehab coach, but strength, body composition, build, fat loss, beginner, world-class athlete. To me, it's all just about, can I work with someone who really actually cares and wants to invest into what I do?
I can totally resonate with that story. It's very similar to mine. Like, I've moved to London, I've moved to Hong Kong now in pursuit of these environments to change the kind of clients I work with, the kind of environments I work with, the colleagues and the people I work with. But I listen to that answer, I can kind of hear the question that coaches are going to ask back to that, because I'm very firm believer of that. You get the right kind of clients, you can apply what you learn, you can learn where the flaws are in your knowledge and go from there. But most coaches probably are going to have a client who is struggling or not following a plan or not adherent, and they're not going to think necessarily about the struggles on the client side. They're going to think, what's my lack? What's my problem? So where is this sort of bad? How does a coach know if they are in the wrong environment and need to change the kind of coaching environment they're in to get more compliant clients? Or how do they know if the clients aren't compliant because of their communication skills, programming skills, nutrition skills? Like, it's a hard nuance to tell.
Yeah, if you're a coach, I always feel like where you're feeling like you're just desperately chasing clients all the time, not from a sales perspective, but to, hey, are you sticking to the plan? It's like, you're like, please tell me that they track their calories this week. Please tell me that they are actually going to fill out their biofeedback form this week. If you're not getting that adherence, then it can be a two-way. Sorry, it can be a two-way street, where it can be, are you communicating that well enough? So it's important to, you want to have standards. You say, hey, this is what I expect, like what I want from my client. But a lot of the times, coaches, and I know this firsthand from myself, I wasn't very good at clarifying what my expectations were, what I needed from them. You just hope for the best, and you don't really lay out the terms, and then you get so used to it. And often clients, I found, they weren't checking in. I was getting angry, but they were actually like scared. So they didn't know that they didn't know how much to message you. They didn't know when. So, but just being a coach that can actually, clarity of message, clarity, like what's the check-in approach? What's our day to, communicate? How do we do that? All these things really matter, and then allows you to kind of get some structure to it. But from a standpoint of, is it me? Is it the client? I'll just look at, the common denominator. Like let's say you have, and I know this very well, I'm fortunate enough to have friends, a lot of very big coaches I've been friends with. We all have clients we've had, even at our top of the top, they've hated us, who said, we're a terrible coach and you don't know what you're doing. It's like, but if 99% of your clients are absolutely killing it, you probably know that the common denominator is not so much you. It's probably, hey, that client was just not a good fit. But if it's the other way around, as you probably see on social media, anyone can get someone a result. If anyone can get a super motivated client a fat loss transformation. But are you doing it a one-off, or is it consistent? For me, I remember from when I got into kind of bikini prep and stuff like that, and my partner Lauren won the world bikini title on the WBFF. I was like, cool. Now that's great. Now, how do I keep proving that that was not a one-hit wonder. How can I do that? So then I trained more girls, and I think 3 in a row won their shows, my next 3 clients in Australian shows, and then did again, do it again. So I think it's really important from a standpoint of, hey, am I doing well? Can you consistently do this? Can you consistently do this with a variety of people? And what I meant kind of from what I kind of meant before saying, I'm not too phased about, hey, I need this very, very specific niche client. Something that really, I guess, excites me is the ability to get a vast amount of people results, different goals. And like, you can be super, super niche. And the thing is, right, if you go super, super niche, you don't really need to think about program. If you find 30 girls who want the exact same thing, kind of 22 years old, want to do a bikini, I could probably just give them one of my guidebooks, which is based off, some of my clients who won world titles programs. But true personalized coaching and is, trying to fit it to a specific goal. A person who can't squat, a person who has an injury, or a person has, struggles around nutrition and mentally, and you love everyone tracking, but this one client can't track. So it forces you to level up and think outside the box. And that's, for me, what I think a really good coach is a really good coach has the ability to how to put it. A really good coach, I spoke about this yesterday, I think, on my story, is that you want to have like an idea of where you want to go with a client, but you also want to have ability to deviate when things change. I remember Jeff Bezos, I was reading a book about him. I think it's something along the lines of, be obsessed with, like, say, a goal of greatness, but be flexible in how you get to greatness. And that's kind of the way I'm always looking at stuff. It's like, all right, I want to be an elite coach. I want to get amazing results, but I also don't want to be just a one-trick kind of pony.
Yeah, I think you can. That word expectations is really important there, both in your business and what you expect from your clients. And it's the same thing when you look at a sort of a coaching process. And what I would think of with asking that same question of, is your clients the issue here? Whether the question is, do they want it enough? Is it you or is it them? Is like having that expectations with how you want to communicate, like you said, and also having the expectations. What is the minimum viable expectation you have from them to achieve that same result? So we know we need to have some calorie deficit if the goal is fat loss. We know we're going to have some level of activity. We know there's going to be some level of communication that you're going to lay out, probably some weight training and a protein goal. Now, if the way you get there, the approach could be high carb, low carb, fasting, carnivore, vegan, whatever approach, portion control guide, meal plans to get to that end goal. But you should never be flexible on the non-negotiables that are needed to get to that goal. And like I've had it, we're Hong Kong is a very weird market in terms of it's a very spoiled. I think you've been to Hong Kong, right?
Yeah, I've lectured there. I've done some seminars there.
Yeah, so like the fast food market, no one has a kitchen, everyone eats out. And I've had it where clients go, well, shaking a shaker bottle of protein is too much effort. At that point, it's like, well, where can I help? If that's the barrier to entry, your job is just to manage expectations in terms of you're now guesstimating. And if someone that you understand that, that's your choice then whether you want to find an environment you've got clients that are going to be more committed to that plan. But at least you're not fighting your client tooth and nail every single day, chasing them going, oh man, we need to do this to get a result. It's more, okay, action X is going to make this slower. As long as you're okay with that, as long as you're okay with the guesstimation, we're good. We're just going to train. And I think coaches get caught up in this trying to fight for and always want to improve, but almost trying to lean back on their morals too much to be accommodating. And then the client ends up not knowing that they're not going anywhere.
100%. And I get a lot, like, for me, obviously, like, when I train people and like they say I have a big social media following, I've trained a lot of women with millions of followers over the years and stuff like that. And something I get a lot is someone will send me a screenshot of X client. I want to look like her. I'm like, what program do I need to do this? I'm like, okay, cool. Well, tell me about yourself. She's like, oh, well, I just had 2 kids. I'm 40. My last kid I had 3 months ago. And I train from home and I've got a pair of dumbbells and, et cetera, et cetera. You know what I mean? It's like, well, you're telling me you want to look like a world-class, physique female competitor who's trained for 7 years religiously. This is her a week out from stage. So her photo shoot's photo when she's looking her best. She doesn't look like this year round, she's trained 6 days. I mean, it's just the expectations and that's also the hard thing is being genuine. I think a lot of the times it sounds kind of harsh, but I think a lot of the times people just think just because you try hard, you're going to look like your idol. And I saw that, for me when I was, training when I was young, I wanted to look like Arnold Schwarzenegger and all this stuff. And I got into like the WWE when I was young and like John Cena and The Rock and they were jacked. And I was like, oh man, like
You, me both.
I want to look like that. And here I was killing myself. And I was like, people were like, they're on steroids. I was like, what's that? And it's just like, and then, I'm 5'8" and they're like, they're 6'4". And I mean? Like, it's just like, no matter what, like even though I did all the steroids in the world, like they did, I wouldn't even look like them. You often, everyone's like, oh, well, Ronnie Coleman is because of steroids. Like, I'm sure the world's best natural bodybuilders, even they took steroids, wouldn't look like him, So it's just kind of understanding expectations, I think, is really important, So don't, I remember my mate, Dane McDonald from the owner of Clean Health, used to say, under promise, over deliver, So don't kind of oversell yourself, say I'm going to do all these things and then let down people. So, but it doesn't mean you obviously don't sell yourself, but you want to go conservative on your estimations of kind of what they can do, because and you also really want to just make people understand that, like, hey, your situation might be different to someone else's, and not even outside genetics. If you're expecting to look like X person who trains 6 days a week, and hey, did you know that like I got one of my clients who she won her WBFF bikini pro card in London last year, and for her prep she had to go really low calories at the end, like 1100 at the end to get on stage. It wasn't ideal, but we had to do the final 2 weeks. It's the reality of prep. And I had a lady say, hey, I want to do this and that. I'm like, I want to look like that. I'm like, that is suffering. That's really hard work, unless you've got a goal to get on stage like she did, and it was, for her business and stuff like that. That level of condition is not something you should be striving for. It's like it's truly suffering. It's like that big goal, and it's not just to look like that. It was for a specific time, a date, a period of trying to look like that for a day or two. And that's just one of the things I think is really important as a coach, is to have expectations kind of set, or like from a standpoint of what's realistic, and then, as you said, from a coaching standpoint of clarity of message. What do you need from the client for them to get a solid result? What's your expectations? For me, it's I want you to track. I need you to be training in a gym or a well-equipped gym. I need you to check in with me once a week. I need you, all these things. So it's not so much a standpoint of I need, a client who wants 7 kilos of fat loss in 6 weeks. It's more so I want a client who can tick off the boxes of what I kind of need for me to create effective, intelligent training programs and not guesswork. So that's why I like my clients must track, say, macros, because I don't want to guess. I want to know exactly what you're doing. And that's just for me. And I know a lot of coaches don't do that, but they're not, my business, my whole identity is kind of is my results. So if I'm not going to do 100% of what I need to know to deliver that expectation, then I'm doing a client a disservice. But that's why I'm not for every client. I'm not for most, general population people who just looking to feel a little bit better, So, and that's okay. It's knowing that you're not for everyone is also important.
I also think it's a lot of people don't really know, not to say they don't really know what hard work is, but my hard work and your hard work is going to be different. So when a client goes, yeah, I can work hard, I was like, yeah, but that's not necessarily hard work like your bikini prep girl is. Doesn't mean we can't get there. But right now, you're not able to train with a level of intensity. You have no idea what this dieting perspective is going to be like. Like, this is going to be totally new to you. And it goes back to that too nice thing with coaches, I think, where sometimes they're so nice, it goes, okay, we don't need to track, we don't need to do this. And they're just compromising their results more than anything else, but they don't communicate to the client that this is compromising the results. So then people end up in this diet limbo. And I think it's almost a duty of care to, like you said, to tell them this is the reality of this is what this person was like. I had a guy, this extreme example, but it's a comical way of getting this point home. I had a guy apply for online coaching a number of years ago who he looked like Weird Al Yankovic in his before photos. And he sent me a picture of Terry Crews, if that's what he wanted to look like. And I'm like, there's a few things I can't do here. Like, we can't physically do this.
I can
And
shave your head though.
Yeah, we'll shave your head and we'll try and put on as much muscle as possible, but you will not look like this guy. And this is where now, if I go with people, if you want to look like a certain after photo, do you look like their before photo? In terms of how much body fat they were carrying, what their frame looks like, what the shape looks like. Because if you don't, let's find a before photo you do like, or accept that this is going to be a longer process.
I like that. And something I often try to remind people is as well, even when I train, I've trained a lot of really popular women, is often even their after photo, they're still not happy. They still don't even feel like that's what I want to look like, So a lot of people say, I want to look like that. That's going to be my happiness. That's like, if I can look like her. It's like, well, I can tell you right now that she looks like her because it is her, and she's still not feeling like her problems are solved, and she's always trying to get better and stuff like that. So it's also just that kind of understanding of, hey, like, people naturally, I always often do it, and hey, I'll be happy when, and it's like, well, maybe not. So let's learn to really enjoy the process of the gym. If we're just fixated trying to look like X person, that's where I think we start to get kind of unhealthy expectations and all that stuff. And and especially if someone new to the gym, they start, sounds cliche, but start to do it for the wrong reasons, and I did a post the other day about the real key, I think, to longevity in the gym is for it to not be your sole identity. And so often people just, when their entire self-esteem is attached to their physique, when it doesn't go well, that's also a recipe for disaster and makes them then hate the gym. And if you have goals in the gym, but it's not life or death, I think that's also what makes the process more enjoyable, when it's not going perfect and you have things outside the gym and hobbies and all that stuff. And that's kind of also getting the point across that, hey, this person you want to look like, they're a personal trainer. They're trying to win a comp, and that by winning a comp, they get good marketing, which makes them more money and all that stuff. And you're a mum of 3 kids, working full time, and you're not a personal trainer. Your job is, you know what I mean? So like the real things that are tied to that suffering is probably not the same as someone who's trying to do it for their job, if that makes sense.
Mm. I think there's 2 things you touched on there, which is interesting, about people almost not being happy when they get to the end goal. Because also what most people don't realize is most of the time they get to the end of their first diet and they're going to be short of where the end goal they had in their head is. Like the first diet almost is like cleaning the palate. It's like we spoke about at the start of this episode or before we went on, I think it was before we went on air, about tidying the house and having cleaners and the environment. I think the first diet is like cleaning the house. It's just showing you what you have to work with. Then you know what space you have to put up shelves. And most people get to the end and going, I feel small. It's like, yeah, well, you didn't have much to work with anyway. But now we start that process. And I think the other thing you brought up, which I think was really interesting there, was the intensity being tied to the gym. And I know that you went through a period of time where you didn't train very much, and not like many of us during the pandemic. And I'm coming out of a very similar thing. And I think that's something that more coaches experience, but are not willing to admit, because their life almost has to be tied to the gym because their body is their marketing and their advert. And then when something doesn't go well, or they want to experience other things in life that aren't a machine chest press or a prime row, all of a sudden they lose their physique and things start to shift. Do you see this with the coach you work with, that they have this sort of identity shift, especially as they get a little bit older and, they maybe not as in good shape as they used to be?
Well, I certainly see it with myself. That's the biggest thing, is that I'm 34 now, not as old, but going into COVID, I was in kind of really really great shape for the last like half decade or probably decade and stuff like that. I did photo shoots and all that stuff, and then COVID, I got super depressed, put on 15 kilos, didn't train, and all these stuff. Probably lost 5 kilos of muscle, put on 15 kilos of fat, and gained a really unhealthy relationship with food, where it just became kind of, during COVID, like my reward sense, like, oh cool, Uber Eats is coming, that's the one thing that can make me feel good. And then the thing is that I was used to doing kind of, all right, I've got 8 weeks to going away, I'm just going to do a hardcore transformation, back when I was younger. And it felt life or death. Like I was like, oh, I'm going to be so happy and girls are going to love me and stuff when I have abs. And so it was such a really powerful thing to diet. But then since kind of my depression really kicked in a couple of years ago with the pandemic, when it came time to lose weight, I what was different was I didn't have that such a hard why behind it. I was like, I know I should, and so I should do it, and I know I need to get healthy. I need to go back to the gym. I need to eat better. But it was when I definitely haven't got back in the same shape because it hasn't been that sense of that why was as strong. When before it was like, oh, I have to look this way to have people want to work with me, and I have to look this way to get clients and get respect and all that stuff. And for me, what really changed was my content kind of became about more, as my profile is Coach Mark Carroll, about my clients and what I can do for other people, and my clients kind of became the front and center. And once that shifted, it wasn't that oh man, I have to be shredded. Once I got to kind of realize that, hey, my business could go really well without that. In a good way, it meant that, hey, I didn't have to be as crazy in shape. But in a bad way, it also meant that when dieting and you got in that hard, hungry phase, I also has stopped me from probably sticking at it. When you've got that really strong why, which is kind of why I think I'm nowhere near in the shape I once was, because if you don't have that super super powerful reason for doing something, especially when it gets hard, it's really hard to really stick at it. So I can get in a solid place these days, but until I find a stronger why to, go from, 15% body fat to 10% body fat again, I'm probably not going to do it, because there's no real attachment other than, oh, I'd like to look a bit better. It's not that internal, man, my life will be better or anything like that. And that's just something I think most coaches kind of associate with as they get older and stuff like that. And it's in a way, I think it's actually a positive, because once you start to realize that as a coach, like, your best feature is not your body, and the more you realize that, the more that, oh wow, like, it opens up your mind that, hey, I want to learn, like, what can I do for other people, and the more you do that, I think it actually then makes you even hungrier to get better results for people and stuff like that. But it's inevitable, as you age and stuff like that. Not that 34 or whatever is old and stuff, but it's inevitable that we begin to transition away from, I think, hopefully, that your identity is just your physique.
And I think you can keep. You've seen people stay in great shape until their 60s, but your physique is a depreciating asset. But your knowledge, what you can do in your business, can be almost ever growing. And like, do you listen to a lot of Chris Williamson, Modern Wisdom podcast? Like, he talks about this thing called the menopause, where people sort of hit 30 and they all start to go from being bodybuilders and wanting to grow massive arms to doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And I saw this trend when I was in my early 20s, and I was like, I won't be that way. Bodybuilding till I die, like, why would anyone do that? And I've not done it yet, but I've hit 30 and I'm going, that BJJ class sounds pretty good. And the shift of, like, that drive now, spending all my 20s in a basement gym for years, not really seeing the world, to moving in this amazing place in Hong Kong and wanting to experience all the food and all that life has to offer. Like, now, for the first time in a long time, I've had a why, because I'm getting married in August. But I'm now self-aware. It's like, when that wedding's over, I'm going to be right back to that position where I need to adapt. I need to find something new. I need to find something that's going to mentally stimulate me from a different training response to something that's going to be maybe about longevity or strength, or doing something to complement what I do, because that drive to be shredded for girls in a nightclub or to grow my business isn't going to be there in the same way as it was 10 years ago.
The way I'd kind of counter his point, and it kind of just came to me just while you're talking and stuff like that, is that I think a lot of the people who kind of get to that stage where, like, all right, weights, I've been doing this and now I'm, going to do BJJ, and, you see a lot and all that stuff. The other thing, though, like, a lot of those guys, I think the one thing a lot of them have in common is that they've been doing weights probably since high school. They've been doing it for years. It's like, it's not a matter of like, oh man, now I don't care about weights. I think you said it as well. It's like, I need something exciting, something new. It's like, as we spoke about that earlier, I think before the call, like that new car. When you get that new car, you get used to it. And I think by about early 30s, you probably realize you're not going to be Mr. Olympia. You've probably got a partner already, and you start to go, well, I've got a partner. Like, I'm not trying to be the Jack Shredder guy at a festival anymore. and you've probably got a place where you established yourself a little bit more in your career and stuff like that. And, so it's not, I don't think necessarily that, hey, everyone just gets over the weight itself. Like, it's more, I think people just get what they've kind of, I think what they realize they could have milked out of it for the most, like how much can we get out of it? It's kind of probably been achieved. And you kind of start to realize, hey, like, I'm not going to really take this anywhere further, but I can still probably train 3 days a week and keep 95% of my results. So why don't I start doing something new? Instead of training 6-7 days a week and not really getting much better in my mid-30s, why don't I train 3 days a week and do that really, really well and enjoy those 3 days and then find something else to balance out? One of the things that's exciting in life is learning. That's or feeling like you're a beginner. That's something new. Is, oh wow, like cool, I'm starting again. And if you're a trainer, like I started training when I was like 13, 14, like, and even when you learn stuff, it's like, oh, a new tempo, a new exercise, it's a little bit exciting, but it's not the same. It doesn't hit the same as, oh my God, I'm in the gym for the first time. Oh my God, like imagine if I built more muscle, what my life would be like, how cool and popular I'll be. And I think that's where you start to get to a sense of, well, what else is this getting me? And the people I find, though, who actually often accelerate their physique in their late 30s and 40s are the ones who get into it in their mid-30s. They're often, hey, I never trained in my 20s and now I got into it. So it's still in that new exciting phase. But eventually, unless, my mate Lane Norton was staying with me when he was in Australia, and he was at the gym and we were at the gym together and he was doing his powerlifting, and I was like, like, do you love it? He's like, I love it more than ever. I just love, it's just, I just absolutely just want to train. And, and you get people like that, and he's, I think, 41 and he's been doing it for decades, but he also still competes in powerlifting. So having that kind of an event to hold you, accountable. So he's a world champion. So having something to, I guess, compete in still keeps that excitement alive. It's that, but if you're not competing, if you're not going against anyone, then it's kind of like, well, what is the win eventually?
Do you think there's a trend in longevity in terms of weight training drive in people where the physique is the byproduct rather than the end goal? Like you said, Lane Norton there, but because it's powerlifting, the training is the outcome. Like I'm trying to beat that, where physique is the byproduct of the training, which is the outcome, which is maybe, as you said, is either a depreciating asset, or if you are in a different part of life with kids and a family, even if you are more muscular than you were 5 years ago, you don't look more muscular than you were 5 years ago because you've got a few layers on top of it. Whereas if weight goes up on the bar, weight goes up on the bar.
I'd kind of say, as always, it's kind of individual, but I think the people who get a lot of self-esteem building from the gym would obviously want to keep at it. That's the thing where they attach a lot of their happiness and self-worth to, not in a negative way, but they feel good. They love being the jack guy. They love taking their shirt off in their 40s and being like, all the mums like, oh man, like look at her dad, like some people I know, because I've like friends, like they just, it's their vibe, and they like, it's their outlet, and no matter what, they just live and breathe the gym, and a lot of these people aren't even, they don't work in the industry. It's just their passion. It's just, for whatever it is, it just sets their soul on fire, but for a lot of people, I think, we all change. I'm a different person now in my early 30s than I was in my late 20s and early 20s and teenage years. And so as you change, I think it's very organic for your passions to change, and, what really, I guess, excited you, and what, your self-esteem was kind of built off and stuff like that, or the thing, like whatever that is can change, like it's like, it's just normal. We evolve, but not everybody will experience that same difference. Some people, I'm sure they live in the same house for 30 years, or other people get the same job and they stay in that industry. Like, my mum was a school teacher and she worked at the same school for like 30 years in the same suburb. For me, I'm always like, oh, I don't know where I'm going next year. I don't know what I'm doing. It's just, people are different. So I just think that longevity is, it can be quite different. Like you can have longevity and train 2 days a week and still look amazing, and then you have other people who train 7 days a week at the gym and they look the same year round. So what are they doing? Are they doing it well or not? So it also can be is it a positive how much you go in the gym later? Are you neglecting other aspects of your life and like being a good parent and stuff like that? So I think everything, there's nuance to it.
So going into a little bit about the people that stay the same. Obviously, you did a post recently about, I think it might have even been today on your stories, about people year in, year out staying the same. And there's a lot more online coaches, a lot more transformation coaches than ever before. And you see a lot of results where guys end up 51 kilos and no one has a chest. And what stands out about your page is that your girls build tons of muscle. Like, there are so many videos you talking about glute development and hamstring development and delt development. So what is it that you think means that your results actually add muscle mass? Why are your results different to a lot of coaches out there?
Geez, I think it's. Let me have a thought. I think there's always going to be lots of layers to it. You know, for me, without sounding like a a wanker and stuff like that, I do think my level of program design, I think, is just I truly believe it's the best of the best in the world with what I do. Who I work with and what I work with. I just feel like I'm truly at a level where I've been doing it for so long with so much passion. I understand kind of what the people who come to me, what their kind of needs are. So you kind of get a good idea of volume and all that stuff, and exercise selection and all that basic stuff. But I think one of the things I try to really educate on, and it's quite hard on social media, but I try to do it a lot, is the benefit of spending time out of a calorie deficit. Actually laying the foundation of muscle mass and getting people to embrace being uncomfortable for long periods of time. So it's very validating having abs. It's very validating look amazing in a bikini, especially if you've felt uncomfortable a long time in your body, and then you learn how to diet and you go in calorie deficit and lose 15 kilos and you feel amazing and everyone tells you how amazing you look. It becomes really, really like, oh man, I love those compliments. But the longer you stay really in that kind of level of lean and stuff like that, you stop getting to a level where you can really improve. After those initial gains and stuff like that, you're probably not going to build much muscle unless you're kind of a genetic freak on low calories. So something I always just really try to look at is extended periods of calories up, educating around that and really kind of laying that platform of base building, and, the journey, the process. And I always look at myself as kind of a blend of a strength coach and a hypertrophy coach, so my clients are always getting stronger. I routinely have women, 60 kilos squatting, 150 kilo bikini competitors, and stuff like that. And I've had bikini competitors deadlift 180 kilos, so like that's why kind of my foundation is strength gains and stuff like that with a hypertrophy balance. And
do you think that's good from the strength component is more from a little bit higher intensity, creating a little bit more mechanical tension, or is the strength component for you more data driven? It's like, if I see the squat numbers going up, it's like the indicator lift to know if my hypertrophy is working. Because I always look at setting goals either from a strength. If a goal, someone came to me saying, well, they want a bigger deadlift, I go from either a top down approach. So the deadlift's the goal. What's the weak link in the deadlift? That's my B's, that's my C's. But if I've got a physique goal, I'm probably looking at what is the big output lift that's going to help me grow their quads or their hamstrings. And I'll put them on a hamstring curl or a hack squat or something stable I can put a lot of output in. And then I'll pick indicator lifts that I might push up for strength, which will help, but it's not my main driver. It's almost like, okay, I know everything else in the program is going well if the overall number is going up. Does that make sense?
Yeah, 100%. For me, I always have an indicator lift as the what the program's built around, regardless of kind of the rep range and stuff like that. So because basically I always looked at what can I periodize. So you like over 12 weeks, I always try to like periodize an A series, but doesn't mean the B, C, D series necessarily has to be periodized so much. We're trying to hit basic movement patterns and ensuring that we're kind of ticking the boxes for what needs to be trained. But I'm a huge fan of indicated lists. So for example, I might have a high bar squat on lower 1 and then a deadlift on lower 2, and that's the kind, and then we stick to that for 12, 16 weeks and we periodize both those lifts. And then, the B and C series can balance out with that, so the thing is, all right, so a lot of these times these days, people are like, oh, well, you don't need a squat, you don't need a deadlift and all that stuff. Well, yeah, but you don't need to do any exercise technically to build muscle. But then the argument is, well, squats and deadlifts aren't that useful. But for me, I'm always somewhere in the middle. For some of the best physiques ever in the world have been built off just kind of doing the basic exercises. Likewise, some of the best physiques in the world have been built off doing none of those basic. And so I think though a blended approach works well, and it's a blended approach, not just again from a hypertrophy standpoint. It's from a I think personality traits kind of standpoint. It's a standpoint of I want clients to feel like they're progressing and having wins. So if you're in a build phase and you're used to being 55 kilos shredded bikini girl, and now you're 67 kilos in a build, and the scale's not validating you, the mirror's not validating you, Instagram's not validating you, but you notice your squat just keeps going up and you feel like a boss and you're excited to get into the gym because, man, I want to see if I can hit a 100 kilo squat today. If you're finding things that you're still progressing, and that's why I love strength adaptations. And strength adaptations don't have to be a 1 rep max. It can be a 7 rep max, it can be an 8 rep max. They're all still strength adaptations relative to kind of, what they've been doing. Where were they before? Can they do more weight? And I'm still a huge believer that 9.9 times out of 10, if a client, say, is squatting 60 kilos for 6 reps, and in a year's time she's squatting 100 kilos for 6 reps, she will have, improved legs. So it's if you're doing, say, purely neurological 1 rep maxes and stuff like that, not necessarily. But if you're kind of, I do still feel, the more I learn and still go back to it, that strength can be such a easy driver for progression. And it's also definitely anecdotally, I'd say that strength gains or maintenance of strength gains, regardless of the rep range, are always a really good indicator for a client maintaining their muscle mass in the calorie deficit. So that's why I always look for is a client who can, keep their strength as much as possible. They might not be doing 4 sets of 5 anymore. They might be just doing 2 sets of 5 just to keep those adaptations. And then we get more volume from less systemically taxing movements, if that kind of makes sense.
And it goes back to that longevity thing, right? I think the focus a lot in the industry has been on the exercise mechanics world. And in a way, this is great. And people learning how to individualize a program to somebody's clients and working at ways around limb lengths and femurs and structures and things like this. But I'm a case in point, right? I went into this world with secondhand RTS knowledge where people taught me it 3 or 4 rungs down. And I wasn't smart enough to know it at the time, so I just kind of followed the advice blindly. I was like, well, your femurs are long and you're going to have a big lean forward squat, so they're not good for quads, don't do them. So I never did them for years and years and years. It was pendulum squats, hack squats, split squats. And then at some point, you lose that muscle for training because, as you said, you're not feeling like you're progressing. And there's nothing to think, there's a limit, relatively high limit, but there's a limit to how much I can load a pendulum squat, but I can keep loading a squat bar indefinitely. And I think people forget about the psychological component to training. And as you perfectly mentioned, especially in a building phase, where that performance mindset is so key, because now I like looking at building phases like putting money in an investment fund and dieting, like putting money into a savings account. When you put money in a savings account, you're like, oh my God, I'm getting richer every week. You feel flush. When you're putting money into an index fund, you're getting poorer. Your bank account's getting less and less and less. But in the background, the work's being done. And this is the building phases. You're getting softer. You're hiding your hard work. And if you've got nothing to validate that you're going in the right direction, why do you keep going in the right direction? And I think that's where some of those big lifts come up. But like, I don't know if I know you're a big fan of periodization like me, but I don't know if you periodize in an undulating accumulation intensification format. If so, do those indicator lifts stay the same in your higher rep ranges? Like 8 to 12 rep deadlifts, maybe if you've got someone really, really advanced, but may not be conducive to somebody to really get a good effect safely, like they would do in a 6x3.
Yeah, so I was really fortunate. Like, undulating is kind of my main kind of structure I use these days for clients. A few reasons. Obviously, I'm a big believer in it, but I'm in concepts of it. But the main thing I'm really a believer in is I think clients enjoy the different fluctuations in rep ranges, and that's more so from these days, kind of with the research, I think the main reason to alter reps for the most part is client enjoyment, stimulation, stuff like that. Other than obviously if you're doing, say, neurological or really trying metabolic work. But in the standpoint of, exercises and rep ranges, I was really fortunate to learn from, Charles Poliquin in person and Stefan Cazalt. If you know Stefan Cazalt.
Yeah, I know Stefan
Kilo,
well. I've had him on the show.
yeah, I spent a week with Stefan in Huntington Beach about 6 years ago, private internship. So we spent days, would sit there across from the desk just writing year-long periodizations of exercises. Just sit there 8-9 hours of just writing and writing and writing. And so this is where I kind of learned a lot of my, skills, like literally from the best guys on the planet, and sitting directly with them, talking to them and analyzing, and me writing something, they go, mark that shit, go right. Like, so if you want to get your, and this is where I thought I was great, and I was just told.
And the Poliquin guys are brutal as well, right? They won't sugarcoat. They'll tell you it's shit.
Yeah, and so they're really strict on, their rules and stuff like that. So I've always kind of said, I think, and this is going to sound really wankery, but I think I've done a very good job of updating kind of undulating periodization for a hypertrophy perspective, for not just the general public, but for bikini competitors. It wasn't something really used, and I think I updated it really well to a way that translates over to kind of the literature these days, and not being married to certain things just because this phase is an intensification phase. But from a standpoint of what you're saying is that a lot of undulating periodization was built around athletes, right? And so so it was like 6-8 reps fight was an accumulation phase. But this is where I look more at like movement patterns. So for example, if I'm doing like a more hypertrophy focused day, your 10 to 12 rep A series hip hinge might be an RDL, so because it's constant tension, and then a 6 to 8, 8 to 10 might be a floating deadlift, again a constant tension, and then we save the intensification phases for the true indicator lift, which is going to be, say, a conventional deadlift from the floor. So likewise, I might do, if I do 10 to 12 reps, I might be doing for a squat a really high heel elevation, so we're pushing depth, really upright torso, so the lower back's not getting too much fatigue for the higher rep range, but that's a big thing. So not every exercise has to be specific rep ranges. So you can do a hack squat of phases, but for like a deadlift, I don't normally go above 8 reps for an actual conventional deadlift. Anything above that, that's where I quite like a floating deadlift for maybe 8 to 10 rep range, or just a RDL and stuff like that. And same with a squat, low bar, I don't normally go above 8 reps, but then might do a high heel elevation kind of cyclist squat for that 10 to 12 rep range. But really, honestly, with squats, it just starts to become cardio when you get above that.
When it comes to like the length of phases, I know Stefan Gasol's very big on 3-week phases, which I get with his system. It fits perfectly into this year structure, and it's very, very systemized. But like how much of that is like nervous system adaptation, then you're changing it straight away. And I know I did a 5-hour mentorship. Are you familiar with Tom Hibbert in Southampton? No. If you like your programming, he's a strongman competitor. He's was world champion under 90 kilo strongman guy, and one of the best programmers I've ever met. I did a 5-hour mentorship with him talking about hypertrophy, and he was like, his thing is strength, and he was like, the best hypertrophy rep range is the one the client enjoys to train hardest enough, which I think there's great value in, as you said, in terms of psychological components to things like this. But like, do your phases, I know you mentioned a point of like changing a program every 4 weeks with a client on a recent post. Do you stick quite religiously to that, or does that depend on the goal? Like hypertrophy, because of the length of time that you would need outside of the neurological changes, is longer, and then maybe strength might be a bit shorter, or does it stay quite systemized? And if so, why?
It depends on what I'm doing these days, truthfully. Since most of my clients are going to be predominantly hypertrophy, fat loss, transformation kind of stuff, I like 4-week phases. The first few weeks are going to be neurological, and then the next few weeks become more structural adaptations. And the thing is, though, is that it doesn't mean you have to do exactly the same. And so there's something when I see people kind of, I think, not confused, but changing your program doesn't mean you have to completely. It's like doesn't mean you did squats one phase and next phase you're doing a leg extension first. So training like you might do say a linear and you do 8 to 10 heels elevate high bar, and then next phase you do 6 to 8 high bar, with a pause. And next phase you do 4 to 5 with high bar, no pause. So you're still drilling in that same movement pattern. It's just very small changes in the technique, which can be, for a variety of reasons. You can be targeting a weak point with a pause, slow eccentric, more heel elevation, get more knee flexion, etc. When it comes to chopping change, that's why I think people often get confused. I think they're just thinking so often you just do completely different things. So I'm pretty methodical with my movement patterns. What I prefer to do is I'm also periodizing, say, tempo. I'm also periodizing the rep range. I'm periodizing the rest period. I'm periodizing, say, a hand position on a pull up. But my thing is to really drill in those same kind of movement patterns and just change small variables. But from a standpoint of programs, weeks, I like 4 weeks. So anything over 4 weeks, I find clients primarily get just mentally quite bored. That's why I find 4 weeks is the gold standard. And the way I do stuff is I kind of do a bit more old school of RPE progression week to week. So my goal is, week 3 reach kind of where their old, let's say, PB for 6 reps was, and then week 4 I want to surpass that, and then the next phase, week 1 is somewhat of an artificial deload because they might regress back to new phase RPE 7 whilst they try to learn. I want them to underestimate their loads to allow us good 5% or so progression and load each week. From a standpoint of 3 phases, I think 3-week phases can still work really well if you're doing like advanced neurological stuff. Like when I use I'm writing a course at the moment, our program design part 2, and today I was writing all about advanced wave loads. So if you're doing a 5-3-1 wave load, and the way I kind of rotate them, or my client Jack, he's doing an Omni method. I don't know if you know an Omni method. So
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. So it might be set 1, heels elevated squat. Set 2, heels flat. Set 3, heels elevated, and you alternate. So it's just about very small changes to recruit, same movement pattern, but small changes to a little bit different mo unit recruitment, set to set, but you're doing 6 to 8 sets of it depending on the program. So it's more of a low rep phase. Certain phases like those really hard ones, you keep them short, and then you so they're normally like a 5-day rotation for three weeks, something like that. But what is the goal of training the general population of most people is to get them better, and getting better comes from routine, structure, understanding what they're trying to do. If you're chopping and changing every 2-3 weeks for a general population, it can, then are they really improving? No, they are often by week 3 still haven't even got the tempo right on a split squat. But then to counter, I see other people do 5-6 week programs, and I honestly just think that's just boring for a lot of clients. And so it's a fine line. But some clients love it. I've had clients I do 6-7 week programs for, but when I'm kind of working with what I do on mass these days, I find 4 weeks is a fine line because, again, it's a balance of, especially when you're not doing one-on-one exactly, you need to have quality combined with actually enjoyment factor and mentally stimulating, and they feel like they're progressing, but then they're excited for next week. So there's so many complexities to it. Is one also the better or not? Probably it's to be just determined, I think.
I think the big thing with hypertrophy is proximity to failure, right? If you look at people like the Callum Raystricks, Jordan Peters, the bodybuilding, Cooper Killians, the bodybuilding side of the world, they'll do phases that are 6 months, a year long and never change. But their mentality is they just love what they're doing. They love the gym. They don't need change. They're a person who love their logbooks and going to put progressions on their machine chest press week on week. But when you're dealing with Gen Pop, it's like you need to keep them stimulated enough to train as hard as that. Like the act of the chest press isn't always going to be enough. So like one more topic of this before I go for my closing question, because I know we're getting a little bit close to the time that you've got available. So I know that you periodize activity, including periodizing steps. So like, what's your opinion on starting low with cardio and working up as NEAT goes down versus starting with a higher front-loading cardio to improve someone's aerobic base to help them from a nutritional perspective and a conditioning perspective later down the line?
Good question. I think it kind of comes back to who is the client, so what's the goals? That I'd say they're two really different approaches. So if you've got a comp prep competitor, and my goal is to get them, you know, for a bikini girl, 14, 15% body fat. Not like everyone says 10%, 7%. That's not how it works for women. It's actually not as low as you think. But if they're trying to get them 15% body fat, which is crazy straight for a woman, I want to primarily try to do the whole just chipping away. How much can I lose with as little effort as possible? Someone I actually learned it just I used to buy his programs. John Meadows, Mountain Dog. I used to love his programs, and I learned so much of his back in the day. And I remember him just used to talk about his preps years and years ago, and he just used to use the term "not playing all your cards at once." So you have all these different options for when a plateau happens. So if we can get a response early with as little effort as possible, then great, and then let's milk that for all it's worth, and then plateau is cool. Let's make another change. And I remember I saw from Menno Hensemann, I think about 7-8 years ago when I first jumped on the scene, that when he used to train females, he had a way where he basically wouldn't do any cardio with them until they got down to about 1,500, 1,600 calories. He just wanted to use nutrition as much as possible. And once they start to really milk that and plateau, then we'll drive output. So I've kind of liked that approach a lot, and it's something I've used myself with a lot of competitors. So that's kind of my kind of more go-to structure. But on the flip side, if we're talking, say, a general population client, if you got someone who has no work capacity and they feel like they're going to fall over from heart pounding out of the chest from a set of bodyweight split squats, it's quite a different story. And if they're really stressed out, and super stressed, and terrible work capacity, terrible fitness and stuff like that, attacking an aerobic base is going to be really, I think, beneficial to allow them to get more training volume done in the sessions, have a better ability to lower their resting heart rate, obviously improve heart health, and like a response to potentially managing their stress better. So that's where I do actually quite like cardio. And even in, if a client comes to me, say they want to do a build, but they're stressed out and they have terrible work capacity, just because you're lean doesn't mean you don't have that. So I quite like that. But when I do it, it is always definitely more aerobic based initially, to really lay the foundations, where it's not going to be, you see people, do 10-second all out high intensity interval training and then 100-second recovery and stuff like that. So it's just like, to me, it's just kind of like building that base for that general population client. And yeah, so that's it. The thing is, right, everything's just a tool. Every nutrition is a tool. Calories is a tool. Like, obviously everything, like all these strategies, more cardio, less cardio. I'm a big fan of periodizing steps and stuff like that. I always have like an idea of where I want to go with people, but I always make changes. So if they need more, they get more. If they need less, and if I can get a comp prep competitor lean with no cardio, I would. I think that's probably going to be a more ideal place for them. I train all my clients are natural and stuff like that. So trying to maintain muscle tissue and not feel so fatigued on low calories and stuff like that. But likewise, if I've got a general population client, and most of my programs these days, even in a build, I suggest cardio these days, once or twice a week to keep their work capacity up. So it's just always a standpoint of, and I know it's probably not the best answer to give people, but it's always just a standpoint of what's in front of you, who have you got, and yeah. So if I'm trying to get someone transformation epic lean, generally don't play all your cards at once. But it'll depend. If they've got 5 kilos to lose versus 25 kilos to lose, it's a different story. And likewise, the general population, again, I don't think doing some aerobic based building a couple of days a week is bad, but I'm also still a bit of an old school fan of, at times, kind of like a GBC approach to weights and stuff like that. When someone's only got 3 days a week, they can get to the gym. So you kind of get a best of both worlds. I know a lot of people say, blah, blah, you need rest, but I think a GBC approach for overweight person who's only literally got 3 45-minute sessions a week can actually give you a bit of the best of both worlds as well at times.
People like to bash things for whatever it is, whether it's bad experience with companies or change in mind about certain mentors. And I think there's a reason why some of the best, most successful results producing companies in the world have been built off GPC programs. They do work.
Yeah.
They're not for everyone. They're
Well,
not
yeah.
forever.
Well, yeah. Well, I think obviously we both know, like we've, seen companies we've been associated to do that, especially even with, pretty subpar coaches and subpar stuff. But if you get someone who's motivated and they stick to the plan, and I think for the right client and the situation, what they're going for, you can still see some amazing results. And yeah, so for me, I'll always do what I believe will work, So it's that's my thing, there's a lot of stuff that comes out with training these days, and it's like, like I take it with a grain of salt. Like I feel with nutrition's a lot more set in stone. Calorie deficit, but then that's the principle. With training, I think there's so many different kind of ways to generate a result, and it's important, I think, for me and all coaches to kind of have an identity and a structure to what you do, and yeah, know who you are as a coach. Like what's your kind of structures? What's your kind of principles? Well, have your structures adhere to the basic principles of what we know.
I think it's a great answer. I think a lot of people demonize the answer, it depends. I think good coaches often answer it depends and then follow it up with what it depends on, which is exactly what you did there. So I have a closing question that I tend to ask people before I go away, let them tell me where to find them. And I always think in a world right now where people like to talk in absolutes, I realize the best people in the industry don't, and they're always looking to learn. And I know you're someone who's a lifelong student, like I'm a lifelong student. So tell me one thing that you have changed your mind on.
Jeez. Like even for, it sounds bad, but like even from nutrition, like kind of like, my background of when I started really learn a lot of nutrition was a Poliquin background. So it was definitely a demonized in of, carbs. You couldn't have carbs if you're over 10% body fat. And that's what you used to learn from someone you idolize and stuff like that. So, and so one of the things with that is like, I started to do that and get great results. And I was like, oh, cool. Well, low carbs, what's getting them results? But little did you know it wasn't the low carbs, it was the calorie deficit, the correlation versus causation. So that was kind of the big thing. I think training wise though, lately, I often look back at even some of my programs from 4 or 5 years ago, and definitely the amount of volume I was doing, I've definitely regressed. Like serious volume, and this the thing is, like, it worked. Like these are literally world champions that I produce and stuff like that on that, but it's like, well, can I regress things? Can I take a little bit better? So it's kind of been just hey, can I get just as good results with a little bit less and a little bit less and a little bit less? So I think for me, it's just maybe been a regression of how much training we're using, and a bit more, along the terms of something I've always kind of been quite big on recently is, this whole term of effective reps. Are we just doing 5 sets of 15, or are we actually doing effective sets and stuff like that? So but I also don't quite agree with a lot of the stuff that's coming out where people are like, oh, just do 1 set to failure. And I don't agree with that at all, really. And especially with how people kind of talk. It's just 1 set to failure for telling that for a general population person. They don't understand what that is. And it's just terrible technique breakdown. And the people don't realize that when they do that, they use Dorian Yates and stuff like that as an example. And well, funny, the Dorian Yates didn't actually build his physique on that. He was actually already like a Mr. Olympia before that. But the other thing is that Dorian Yates, go watch his videos and his training intensity, and even his warm-up sets, his warm-up sets were like 4 plates on a bench press or whatever, so it's kind of all relative. So I think people then kind of take too much. It's like, oh, do 1 set, 4 total sets for a workout, which I don't agree with either, personally.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. That you have to earn that right. And I think if you can get someone to be able to train and do 1 to 2 really hard sets, that's the end goal. But it's like intuitive eating is the end goal, and staying in shape. People can't do that from day one. If I don't like I like reps in reserve, but I don't like it as a starting point, because someone doesn't know where 1 rep in reserve is if they've never ever pushed where failure is. Like where you think 1 rep in reserve is, and when your client, there's going to be a 10 rep discrepancy. So if you can bring that narrower and narrower and narrower, then maybe eventually you can go from 3-4 sets to 1 to 2 sets. But that's a process that's years of progression of learning how to train.
And the other thing with that is that every rep for someone, even their first few years, it's just practice. It's repetition. It's practice. It's a skill. Training's a skill. Neurological adaptations and improving, neurological efficiency comes from repetition, practicing. So actual, all those sets and all those reps, I still think have huge benefit in carryover into actually improving to lay that foundation of actually having the skills to, as you said, do take sets to failure. And, and then I think you go see a general population, go see this giant bodybuilder doing 4 sets to failure on their entire workout, and they go, oh, cool, they jump on the leg set, do 1 set. And they go, all right, well, a lat pull down. Then they go, oh, that took 7 minutes. That's all you need, right? And they leave, So it's kind of then the interpretation. So I think it's really important that, well, actually, I think it's important, but I don't think it's really delivered quite well what actually that is. And even just from a standpoint of actually warming up, like to actually warm up to get to a real 1 quality all-out set, that's a lot of feeder sets kind of building you into that and building. And that's, again, like that's another art as well of actually teaching people what is enough to neurologically warm up, what is enough to prepare you. And again, it's also knowing your numbers. Like, so if you're doing 1 set only to failure, you have to be pretty good at knowing your numbers to even know what you can actually truly take to failure. And that, again, is a skill from just experience.
And there's lots of tools to get the same job done, right? We said with training, there are many different ways to get to the same outcome. And some people may not want to go there. Like, I've done Mike Mensa style high intensity bodybuilding, and in a way you quite like it, but it's horrible. It's brutal. And you can get, if you don't want to go to that, like almost wanting to cry levels, you can do an extra few sets and accumulate the same level of volume, as long as you're getting within a similar-ish proximity.
Yeah,
there's different ways to
like what it's. I remember I did like Ben Pekulski's programs like MI40 like 12 years ago or 13 years ago, and I was all like 4010 eccentrics, 4 sets of 8, and then a 45-second rest. It's just like, I remember doing this, and I was like, I'm getting so much weaker. I'm just going backwards. Like, this is what I thought, the science was saying. Do slow eccentrics and super short rest periods and do supersets, and it just made no sense to me. I was like, even if this is the best way to build muscle, I hate this. I'm not enjoying this, it's not fun, So, and obviously with the literature, it definitely wasn't the best way, to rest 45 seconds and all that stuff. And just, like, it wasn't enjoyable. So people like to train, so just doing sets and hanging out in the gym and just doing, and 1 set to all out failure. And then, actually taking a set to failure is not super easy as well for a lot of exercises to do it intelligently and safely and stuff like that as well. So it's definitely something I think you need to pick and choose which exercise to do it correctly on as well.
So to finish off this, I could carry on chatting about training for hours, man. This has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for your time. So for anyone that wants to find you, maybe buy a program off you, I've read a few of your ebooks. They are fantastic. So I definitely recommend them. Where can people find Mark Carroll?
You can find me at Coach Mark Carroll, my Instagram, or coachmarkcarroll.com for all my kind of training programs. I've had over 100,000 people or so use my programs all around the world. And then I also have a education company called Carroll Performance, and Carroll Performance is with my brother Glenn, who's a great coach. And we have an advanced program design course, which is over 40 hours of kind of all things program design, periodization. And I also have a certificate 3 and 4 in fitness, which is basically the Australian term for a PT certification. So I have students all over the world who get certified with us to become a trainer in the gym online. So I have clients in the UK, America, Middle East. So that's cool because, I actually create something where I think, most people get qualified and become a PT and then have absolutely no idea what to do day one. Whereas, my brother and I, we've added hours and hours of education on top of the kind of government regulated syllabuses they have in the world to kind of more useful information we find. So, quite a few things, Carroll Performance and coachmarkcarroll.com.
I see a lot of coaches coming here and we'll talk about what they do in the sales pitch. And this is probably like the second or third time, probably Stefan Gazalt being the other one, where I've left it and gone, I'm going to look at that program design course. I'm going into the online world, taking my mentorship full time, and want to have more time to study. So I might give that a purchase myself. Man, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for your time. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you very much.